Accommodation and registration woes are affecting students at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in the Western Cape. A couple of hundred students have been camping out at a multi-purpose hall on one of the campuses there. Many unable to attend classes because they haven't been fully registered for this year. Now, the university says there is no accommodation crisis. We heard from the Vice-Chancellor earlier as well, and that those who haven't been registered have outstanding financial issues. Let's cross now to Heidi Giokos, who's been monitoring the situation for us there. Heidi, you spoke to the Vice-Chancellor earlier, who said that it was a much smaller number of students that seemed to be camping out, but the SRC that you spoke to afterwards, their leadership says that those numbers just do not cut it for them, and that the Vice-Chancellor is not on top of the current situation on the ground. What have you been able to find out since then, and have we seen any showing of the Department of Higher Education?
Yes, so I think let's just get some perspective from the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela, who is here, who was actually speaking about a completely different topic, but we are, of course, taking this opportunity to just get some response from him. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. I want us to speak about what's been happening across the country. It's not just in Gauteng, where we've been seeing universities taking to the streets, but also in KZN, for example. The SRC has indicated here that there could possibly be a shutdown here because of some of the challenges. As the department, I'm sure you are quite concerned as to what's happening.
Thank you very much. Look, we're obviously monitoring the situation at the University of the Witwatersrand. We've deployed senior officials at the institutions to try and get to understand deeply as to what the issues are, but also how we can intervene, to help to resolve the impasse. And similarly with the University of KZN. And in the case of the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, I've engaged with the management, and I understand that they're working together with the SRC to try and resolve some of the accommodation challenges that have been there. We are aware that in some of the universities there have been concerns around the cap that has been put on accommodation to 45,000, and of course this is purely because we're quite concerned around the collusion that has been happening from private accommodation providers in terms of wanting to profiteer. And that's why we had to regulate, because this is, state resources that are meant to facilitate learning and teaching for students. So over the weekend, our department met with the University South Africa Forum to set up a working group to look at how we can deal with the question of accommodation in terms of those institutions that are affected. But I also want to use this opportunity to call on, firstly, our university managers, vice-chancellors in particular, and university councils to engage with the student leadership, to give student leadership an ear, but also to contribute towards finding solutions. And I know that many of them have been doing that. Of course, we have 26 universities, 23 of those have commenced with learning and teaching quite peacefully. It doesn't mean that there are no issues, but it means that both students and management in those institutions have found ways in which they can resolve this crisis. But secondly, I also want to call on the student leadership that let's find also constructive ways within which we can resolve some of these challenges. Yes, protest is allowed, protest is their right, and we cannot shut them from protesting. But I think we have to respect property of universities. Some of the scenes that we've seen, in some instances, unprovoked. We've seen students trashing campuses, students stopping other students from going into class, and basically students wanting to render our institutions, ungovernable. And I do not think that that is a way within which we can resolve some of the crises. We prepared, as the ministry, as our minister has indicated, as the department, to ensure that we work with all the stakeholders on our campuses to resolve, some of the incidents in our campuses. We've also availed the leadership of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, because some of the issues emanate from, issues around student allowances, exclusions, and all of that. in the campuses that are involved, to try and ensure that we speedily resolve this issue. So in our view, we think that there were teething problems with the reopening of universities and TVET colleges, but most of our institutions are stable. There's learning and teaching, and in those 3 universities where there are challenges, we are dealing with those. I mean, like you said, that there are concerns here. The student leadership gave you their version of what the problem is. The university management has given you their version of what the problem is. But there's no crisis, precisely because the leadership of the institutions are working together to ensure that we resolve, whatever impasse that may exist.
So it's interesting, though, because, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor says it's about 50 students specifically. We're speaking about specifically this university that's been affected. Yet the SRC says there is a crisis and it's over 1,000 students with people literally sleeping in corridors. So there's obviously different versions here, and we are waiting to see some of that footage. But this is something that happens every single year, Deputy Minister, where you have universities and students not meeting eye to eye. And it's not just an accommodation problem, but it's also a financial exclusion problem. And yes, while some might not meet the requirements and recommendations, these are human beings that we're talking about, and they have a right to education. Are you worried that this situation could further be exacerbated, especially because the SRC says we must wait till after the 20th of March, there could possibly be a shutdown?
Look, firstly, I must indicate that, through the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, we are this year going to be funding 1.2 million students. Unprecedented, something that's not in anywhere all over the world. Secondly, the number of students who walk into universities without having applied, that number is drastically reduced because we've gone out, we are making students aware that they should apply on time, and they should also apply for the NSFAS on time. And we've also established the Central Application Clearinghouse, which places students in available spots throughout the country. But thirdly, and I think this is also very important, that there is a practice among some students who are doing their grade 12 who would say, look, I don't know if I'm going to pass, I don't know if, and therefore I'm not going to apply. And therefore on the eve of universities reopening, then they walk into the universities without having applied for accommodation or tuition, and they end up not being accommodated at all. And I think that, obviously some universities have put in place measures to mitigate against all of these things. We're quite confident in the leadership of the SRC here, in the leadership of the university here, that they're capable of resolving, this issue. I think the fact that, we haven't seen any altercations yet between the leadership of the institutions means that there's sobriety that is prevailing in terms of dealing with that problem. And upon conclusion of this interview, I'm also obviously going to want to further understand what is the nature of the problem, and find ways within which, as the department, we can be able to assist. But we're making the call as early as now. Those who are doing grade 12, please apply now. But I think also in the overall, we have to appreciate the fact that in as much as there are these 3 institutions that I spoke about where there are protests and all of that, in general, we're quite confident that the state of our higher education institutions in general has been quite peaceful. Learning and teaching is happening, which is a function of these institutions. And, we want to see all of the institutions working. Of course, I've been, given a brief about, concerns that, for instance, students at UCT have raised, concerns students at Tshwane University of Technology have raised, but the leadership of those institutions have assured us that they're working together with the student leadership to try and resolve these matters.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. That is the Deputy Minister for Higher Education, Buti Manamela, and of course monitoring the situation very closely. And as you heard him say, Marcel, that he will be engaging with the leadership of the university to further understand what's going on in the crisis when it comes to accommodation. It's quite an interesting approach to all of this, given what we are seeing play out at, for example, Wits University as well as UKZN. And whether or not the protest or so-called shutdown will trickle to other universities here in the Western Cape.
Okay, thanks for that update. eNCA reporter Heidi Giokos reporting to us from the Bellville campus of the Cape Peninsula University of Technology.